You look like a waitress in that dress. The mocking laughter echoed, turning the CEO's daughter into a joke in the middle of a billion-dollar dinner. But just minutes later, as the arrogant billionaire family boasted about their $50 million deal, the young woman quietly picked up her phone and ordered its cancellation. The entire room froze, every eye fixed on the girl they had mocked, and in seconds their $750 million empire crumbled before them. Olivia stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her back to the imposing windows that framed the Manhattan skyline. The city lights sparkled outside, a silent contrast to the sharp glare of the chandeliers above. Her dress was simple black, no designer label, no embellishments, just clean lines that modestly hugged her figure. Her dark hair fell in loose waves untouched by the hands of a stylist. And her face was bare, no makeup, no gloss, just her natural features, beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention. She was 24 years old, raised in one of the wealthiest families in the country, but you would never know it by looking at her. Her father had taught her early on to behave with discipline, to let her actions speak louder than flash. Never show off, he had told her as a child, his voice firm as he tied his tie on their sprawling estate. Your worth is not in what you wear, it's in what you do. Tonight, however, in this room full of billionaires and their egos, her simplicity made her a target. The gala was a spectacle, a glittering stage where wealth and power were played out in real time. Crystal glasses clinked, heels clicked on marble floors, and every laugh felt like a performance. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition. The billionaires and their families mingled, their voices loud as they discussed deals, investments, and who was who in their world. Olivia had entered quietly, hoping to blend into the background, her small clutch tucked under her arm. She was here to observe, to see the $750 million investment deal her father had been working on for months with the Herreras, a family known for their ruthlessness and their need to dominate every room. She had listened to her father that morning, his low voice over coffee in their kitchen. "They're sharks, Olivia," he had said, stirring his cup, "but their resources could change everything for us." She had nodded, preparing herself for the evening ahead, knowing she would be walking into the lion's den. She found a spot near the windows, the cold glass a small anchor against the heat of the crowd. Her hands were folded in front of her posture calm but alert. She wasn't here to make a scene or prove anything. She just wanted to understand the players her father was dealing with and see the deal through their eyes. But before she could settle into the moment, a voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Tomas Herrera, the billionaire's son, strutted toward her, his tailored suit gleaming under the lights, his mocking smile sharp enough to cut. He was in his late 20s, all straight, sleek hair, the kind of guy who thought charm was something you could buy. He stopped too close, his cologne overwhelming, and leaned in. "You look like a waitress in that dress," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Heads turned. A wave of laughter spread, sharp and cruel, like a blade cutting through the air. Olivia's fingers tightened on her purse, but her face remained steady, her eyes fixed on his without a flicker of doubt. She didn't say a word. Her gaze was enough to make him flinch for just a second before he doubled down with a smile. A woman across the table, her earrings dangling like chandeliers, tilted her head and narrowed her eyes at Olivia. She was clearly a socialite known for her sharp tongue and even sharper Instagram posts, always chasing fame. "Honey, did you borrow that dress from your mom's closet?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake pity. The table erupted in laughter again, some applauding as if it were a show. Clara leaned back, sipping her champagne, her eyes never leaving Olivia, waiting for a crack in her composure. Olivia's lips parted for just a moment, as if she might speak, but instead she adjusted her purse, her fingers deliberate, and let her silence respond. The laughter in the room grew louder, but Clara's smile tightened, as if she had expected more of a fight. "Hey, if this story's resonating with you right now, take a second to grab your phone, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to share these moments with you. Let's keep walking through these stories together." The laughter grew, a wave crashing over the tables. A woman in a bright red dress, her lips painted to match, leaned forward from her seat. Marissa Herrera, Tomas's mother, was the kind of person who could smile while twisting the knife. Her eyes sparkled with malice as she spoke, her voice carrying across the room. Hideseo looks more like a poor student, she said, drawing out the words for maximum effect. The table erupted, their laughter louder now, more confident, as if they had found their entertainment for the evening. A man in a tuxedo, his cufflinks probably worth more than Olivia's entire outfit, shook his head and muttered, "Her father must be ashamed to bring her here." The words stung, sharp and personal, but Olivia didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, a small curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes, and took a slow sip of her water. The glass was cold in her hand, calming her as the room spun its venom. A younger man, perhaps a cousin of the Herreras, leaned forward, his tie slightly crooked, his smile wide and careless. It was Diego, the kind of guy who followed the family's lead without question, always eager to pile on. "Hey, no offense," he said, raising his hands as if he were being friendly, "but you're standing by the window like you're waiting for a bus. Are you sure you were at the right event?" The table recoiled. Some slammed their hands on the table, their drinks splashing. Olivia's shoulders tensed for just a second before she turned slightly, her eyes capturing the city lights outside. She didn't respond, but the way she tilted her head, as if studying Diego's face, made his smile falter. The laughter continued, but some guests exchanged glances, sensing something unsaid in her stillness. The table was a battlefield. Now every glance a weapon, every whisper a shot. A young woman with perfect blonde curls, her dress a cascade of sequins, screaming money. She leaned toward her friend and whispered theatrically, "Why is she even here? She doesn't belong." Her friend, a guy with a Rolex gleaming on his wrist, laughed and added, "Maybe she's lost. Someone should point her to the staff exit." The table roared again, glasses clinking as they toasted their own cruelty. Olivia set her glass down, her movement slow and deliberate, as if she were placing a chess piece on a board. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her silence was a wall they couldn't climb, a silent challenge that made their laughter sound hollow. A waiter stopped near Olivia, his tray balanced carefully, his eyes moving to her stained dress with a flash of sympathy. He was young, perhaps her age, his uniform crisp, but his hands calloused from long shifts. He offered her a fresh napkin, his voice low. "Ma'am, would you like another?" Olivia met his gaze, her expression softening just enough to acknowledge his kindness. She took the napkin, her fingers brushing his, and nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The moment was small, but it cut through the noise of the room, a reminder that not everyone was playing the Herrera game. The waiter moved on, but a few guests nearby took notice, their laughter dying as they watched Olivia fold the napkin neatly in her lap. Dinner began, and the mood shifted, if only for a moment. Waiters moved around the room, plates clinking softly as they served. Olivia lifted her fork, her hand steady, and listened as the conversation turned to the deal. The Herreras were in their element now, throwing out numbers and projections as if they owned the future. Tomas leaned back in his chair, his voice loud and smug. "This deal is going to redefine the industry," he said, looking at his father, Ricardo Herrera, who nodded with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. Ricardo was the patriarch, his gray hair slicked back, his suit tailored to perfection, his presence dominating the room. Olivia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, and spoke, her clear, calm voice cutting through the noise. "The market is volatile right now. Your projections don't account for the tariffs hitting next quarter or the supply chain issues in Asia." The table fell silent. Just for a moment, an older businessman, his tie loosened and his face weathered from years in boardrooms, raised an eyebrow. "She's not wrong," he said almost to himself. "That's sharper than my advisor's opinion." A few others nodded, their expressions shifting from mockery to curiosity. A woman in a green dress leaned toward her husband, whispering, "She knows what she's talking about." The husband nodded, his eyes lingering on Olivia as if he were seeing her for the first time. Tomas's mocking smile faltered, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Beginner's luck," he snapped, throwing his napkin on the table. But the mood had changed. The laughter faded, replaced by cautious interest. People were looking at Olivia differently now, as if they were trying to figure out what they had missed. A man in a pinstripe suit, his hair thinning and his voice oily, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing toward Olivia. It was Victor, an ally of Herrera's who made his fortune negotiating deals and stepping on anyone in his way. "You talk a lot for someone who looks like they shop at thrift stores," Winty said, his tone mockingly curious. "Where did you learn to sound so smart?" "Community college." The table laughed, some applauding as if it were a clever jab. Olivia paused, her fork hovering over her plate, then set it down with a soft click. She looked at Victor, her eyes steady, and asked, "Where did you learn to judge people by their clothes?" The question was simple, delivered without venom, but it landed like a slap. Victor's face flushed and the laughter at the table stuttered, some guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The moment didn't last. Tomas, perhaps sensing the change, rose with theatrical movements, grabbed his wine glass, and sauntered over to Olivia, his steps slow as if he were savoring the attention. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she accidentally spilled red wine on her dress. The liquid splashed onto the black fabric, soaking it, dripping onto the floor. "Oops, sorry," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "At least now it matches your cheap outfit." The room exploded with laughter, louder than before, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Marissa clapped her hands delightedly and added, "If I were really the daughter of a CEO, I'd be wearing designer brands." The table raised their glasses in a toast to her cruelty, their eyes sparkling with amusement. Some guests looked away, their faces tense, as if they knew this had crossed the line. A woman in a silver dress, her hair piled high, stood up to join the fray. It was Evely, a distant relative of Herrera's who thrived on gossip and social climbing. She walked over to Olivia, her heels clicking loudly, and raised her phone, taking a photo of the wine-stained dress. "This is going straight to my followers," her cheerful voice said. "They'll love seeing the CEO's daughter looking like a mess." The table cheered, some pulling out their own phones, flashes lighting up the room. Olivia's hand paused on the napkin, her fingers curling slightly, but she didn't look at Evely. Instead, she reached for her glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with a deliberate click. The energy in the room shifted only fractionally as some guests hesitated, their phones lowering as if something wasn't quite right. Olivia looked down at the stain, her fingers brushing the damp fabric. Her fist clenched for a moment, then relaxed. She stood up, her movement slow and graceful, and faced Tomas. Her voice was soft but sharp, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Do you really think appearance is everything?" The question hung in the air, simple but heavy, like a stone thrown into still water. Tomas opened his mouth, then closed it, his confidence cracking. A man at the table, his face flushed from wine, shouted, "That's exactly like your father's composure." Some guests shifted in their seats, their laughter fading into uncomfortable coughs. Olivia didn't wait for an answer, lifting a napkin, dabbing her dress, and sitting back down, her eyes sharp as ice. A man in the corner, his suit wrinkled and his eyes darting, leaned forward, whispering to his table. It was Pablo, a mid-level investor who clung to the Herrera family's coattails, always eager to prove his loyalty. "I bet she's only here to spy for her dad," he said loud enough for Olivia to hear, probably taking notes to run back to him. The table laughed, some nodding as if it made perfect sense. Olivia's hand paused on her purse, her fingers tracing the edge. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting Pablo's, and asked, "What makes you think I need to take notes?" The question was calm, almost curious, but it carried a weight that made Pablo shrink back, his laughter dying in his throat. The chatter in the room died down, some guests exchanging glances as if they were beginning to wonder who she really was. The Herreras weren't finished. Ricardo leaned forward, his voice roaring with authority, his eyes fixed on Olivia. "Your father is about to sign a multi-million-dollar deal with us," his tone heavy with condescension. "You are nothing here." Marissa joined in, her smile venomous. "If you're smart, you'll sit quietly and keep your mouth shut." The table erupted again, treating Olivia like an accessory in their show. Some guests shook their heads, their expressions darkening as if they knew this had gone too far. A woman in a blue dress whispered to her companion, "This is getting ugly." Olivia didn't move. She took out her phone, her fingers steady, and began to type. A young woman at a nearby table, her necklace sparkling under the lights, leaned forward. Her voice was loud and mocking. It was Layla, a fashion influencer who lived for attention, every move calculated for likes. Girl, you should have at least borrowed some jewelry, she said, and then lifting her own diamond bracelet. This is a gala, not a book club. The table laughed, some mimicking her gesture, showing off their own accessories. Olivia's eyes moved to Layla's bracelet. Then back to her face, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low but clear. Does that bracelet make you feel important? The question was so direct, so devoid of malice, that Layla froze, her hand falling to her lap. The laughter at her table stuttered, and some guests turned, their faces tense with vicarious embarrassment. The room didn't notice at first. They were too busy laughing, too caught up in their own power. But then Olivia held the phone to her ear, her voice low but clear. Dad, I want this deal canceled right now. The words hit like a bomb. The laughter stopped. Glasses froze in midair. Ricardo's face went slack, his fork clattering onto his plate. Who do you think you are to interfere? He snapped, rising so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. But then her father's voice came through the phone loud enough for everyone to hear. If my daughter says so, the deal is off. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. A man in a navy blue suit, his glasses perched on his nose, stood up, his voice trembling with indignation. It was Jorge, a business partner of Herrera's, who prided himself on his connections. This is outrageous, he shouted, pointing at Olivia. You can't just walk in here and ruin a deal like that. The room buzzed, some nodding in agreement, others whispering in shock. Olivia didn't look at him, sliding her phone back into her purse, her movements calm, and folding her hands in her lap. The lawyer who had just entered the room paused, looking at her. Then he continued toward her with the folder. Jorge's face reddened, his voice rising, but Olivia's silence was stronger, a quiet power that made his outburst seem small. Olivia put her phone down, her expression unchanged, not gloating. She didn't need to. The Herreras were crumbling. Tomas's hands shook as he reached for his glass, spilling more wine. Maurice's smile faded, her face pale as she clutched her necklace, her fingers trembling. Ricardo stammered, Mr. CEO, please let us explain. But the line was already dead. The guests began to whisper, their voices a low hum that filled the room. A woman in a gold dress took out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Another man leaned toward his wife, whispering. She finished. Olivia sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the room as if taking it all in. A man in a dark suit entered the ballroom. His steps were quick and purposeful. He was a lawyer, his briefcase clutched tightly, his face grim. He walked straight up to Olivia and handed her a folder. She opened it, looked at the papers, and nodded. Then she raised her voice, firm but steady. Here is the evidence, she said, holding up the documents. The contract was voided in the system 10 minutes ago. You won't see a penny from this deal. The crowd gasped, some pulling out their phones to record, others leaning forward to catch every word. The Herreras collapsed into their seats, their faces drained of color. Tomas stared at the floor, his hands gripping the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. A woman in the corner, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, stood up, her voice trembling with desperation. It was Diana, a friend of the Herrera family who had staked her reputation on their success. You're making a mistake, she said, her eyes wide as she pointed at Olivia. You're throwing away years of planning. The room turned to look. The tension was thick. Olivia closed the folder, her finger firm, and looked at Diana. The mistake was yours, she said, her voice calm but cutting. You assumed I was nobody. Diana's mouth opened, then closed, her shawl falling to the floor as she sank back into her chair. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others filming the exchange, the weight of Olivia's words settling over the room. The room was chaos. Now, one of the Herreras, a cousin with a loud voice and a bad tie, shouted, You've destroyed our family's future. Marissa gasped, her voice shaking. You don't understand the consequences. But Olivia didn't flinch, closing the folder with precise movements and handing it back to the lawyer. The guests were now standing, some shaking their heads, others whispering furiously. A woman in a gold dress murmured, She knew something was strange about her. A man nearby nodded. She's not just a Don. Nobody. The air was thick with shock, with realization, with the weight of what had just happened. A man at the edge of the room, his suit slightly too large, grabbed his phone, his face pale. It was Marco, a junior executive who had been riding the Herrera wave for years. He stepped forward, his voice shaky but loud. "You can't do this," he said, his eyes darting between Olivia and the crowd. "You're just a girl playing with power you don't understand." The room fell silent, waiting for her response. Olivia turned to him, her eyes steady, and said, "I understand power better than you ever will." The words were quiet, but they hit like thunder. Marco stumbled backward, his phone slipping from his hand, the screen cracking as it hit the floor. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some shaking their heads, others filming the moment. Olivia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression softening for the first time all night. She slid it back into her purse and turned toward the door. The crowd parted as she walked, her steps slow but steady, her stained dress somehow looking regal. Now no one spoke. No one dared. The Herreras sat frozen, their empire crumbling in real time. Phones around the room lit up with notifications, bank alerts, emails, panicked messages. The family's accounts were frozen, their assets blocked, their deal dead in the water. Tomas's face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the table. Marisa grabbed her husband's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. A woman in a velvet dress, her hands shaking, stood up, her voice breaking as she spoke. It was Sophia, an ally of the Herreras who had built her career on their behalf. "You're ruining everything," she cried, tears smudging her mascara. "Do you know what this means to us?" The room turned to Olivia, waiting for her reaction. She paused in the doorway, her hand on the handle, and turned just enough to meet Sophia's eyes. "I know exactly what it means." Her voice firm, almost gentle. The words landed like a final blow, and Sophia sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face. The whispers of the crowd became frantic, phones flashing as they captured the moment. A man entered the room and everything changed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding, without a single word. Olivia's husband needed no introduction. The way the room changed said it all. The guests straightened up, their whispers dying away. Ricardo tried to stand, his voice trembling. "We can fix this," he said, but it sounded desperate, like a plea. Tomas looked away, his hands shaking. Marisa's eyes moved to the floor, her confidence gone. Olivia's husband didn't speak. He just walked beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly. She looked at him, and for a moment her face softened, a flash of warmth in her eyes. The fall was swift. The next morning, the headlines screamed across every major media outlet. A single phone call from the CEO's daughter destroyed a $750 million empire in seconds. Social media was relentless. A video of Tomas spilling the wine went viral, shared thousands of times with captions criticizing him. He was fired from his family's company board within hours. Marisa's charitable foundation, built on her public image, lost its biggest sponsors by noon. Ricardo spent weeks in meetings trying to salvage what was left, but the numbers didn't lie. His empire was gone, dismantled by a single phone call. Emily's photo of Olivia's stained dress backfired, the comments tearing her apart for her cruelty. She deleted her account by the end of the day. Olivia didn't stay to watch it unfold. She left the gala with her husband, her steps steady, her head held high. The next day, she was back in her father's office, sitting in a meeting. Her simple dress replaced with another simple outfit. No one mentioned the night before. They didn't need to. The way people looked at her now, cautious, respectful, said enough. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence carried weight, her presence enough to change the room. A junior assistant left a file on her desk, her hands trembling slightly, and whispered, "I saw the news." "You were amazing." Olivia nodded, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softened for a moment before she returned to her work. Years ago, she had been in a different room, a smaller one, with her father. He had been signing papers, his pen moving quickly across the page. She was 16, her hair pulled back, her sneakers scuffed from running around the property. You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he had said without looking up from his work. "Just be yourself, that's enough." She had nodded, her hands in her pockets, and had carried those words with her ever since. That memory would sometimes flicker in her eyes, like when she saw a car like the one her father used to drive, or when she heard someone laugh the way he did. Once at a traffic light, she had paused, her hand on the steering wheel, watching a black sedan drive away, its tail lights shining like the ones she had chased as a child. The Herrera family's downfall did not end with the gala. Tomas's face was everywhere, his mocking smile replaced with a look of defeat. He tried to post an apology online, but the comments tore him apart. Marissa's social circle shrank, her invitations to galas drying up. She was seen in a coffee shop a week later alone, her designer bag looking out of place as she stared at her phone. Ricardo's company lost contracts, investors pulling out one by one. Clara's Instagram posts about the gala were deleted, her followers dwindling as the backlash grew. Diego, the cousin with the crooked tie, was quietly fired from his job. His name was removed from the family website. The family name, once a symbol of untouchable power, was now a cautionary tale. Olivia moved on, not reading the headlines, not checking the trending hashtags. She was too busy working, sitting in meetings, reviewing contracts, her voice firm as she spoke. Her father trusted her. He always had. She had grown up watching him navigate rooms like the one at the gala, watching him keep his cool when others lost their nerves. She had learned from him not only how to talk business, but how to behave when the world tried to knock her down. At a board meeting a week later, an executive hesitated before addressing her, his voice careful. "Miss Olivia, your opinion on the new strategy." She nodded, her pen tapping lightly on the table, and gave her thoughts, her words precise and unwavering. "You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when someone looks at you and decides you're less. When they laugh, thinking they have you figured out. But you know who you are. You know your worth, and you're not alone in that. Olivia's story isn't just hers, it's yours too. Where are you coming from? Leave a comment below and follow me to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, healing."